Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Broadcaster Hour. I'm Roger Hoover with you from Birmingham, Alabama. We've got Kyle Crooks, of course, from Gainesville, Florida. And in the center of the screen, we leave the SEC footprint and go to Big Ten country. Say hello to Brian Boesch, one of the broadcasters for the University of Michigan. And Brian, it's great to see you. How's everything going up in Big Ten country? We noticed you look a little bundled up there.
Yeah, we got into the upper 40s last night into this morning, so we're battling. But no, good to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller, so appreciate you guys having me.
I love that. Listen to WFAN. I'd hear that all the time growing up in New Jersey. But Brian, for you, it is football weather, and for you are part of the Michigan football broadcast and doing a lot of great things with Michigan. Just last week, what did it feel like to have the big house full and just have that football environment back? And you'll have it back again this weekend with Washington in town.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know just how special certain things are at various campuses, and for Ann Arbor, I mean, the big house is it. You know, I'm obviously on the basketball play-by-play call, and that's very, very special, and what they're doing is amazing. But the big house, Michigan Stadium, Saturdays in the fall, there's just something about that here that transcends. And, you know, from my perspective, it was only my fourth game at the big house. Last year, because things were so thrown off, I did home games, my portion of the broadcast at my house, and I did road games at the stadium. We called road basketball games at the big house, but I didn't see any of the home football games because we had a capacity limit and I could do it remotely. So that was my fourth game, and man, just to see everything, it was a perfect day. It was a very impressive week one win. It was just special, and for me, it was the newness of it. But for the people who had been there for so long, for the season ticket holders who, you know, have been coming to tailgate and spend time in Ann Arbor every Saturday for years and decades, I can't even imagine what that meant to them. So it was so special.
And last year, like all of us, we had to call the games remotely. For me, it was on the second floor of our communications building, watching a monitor, essentially doing the games where they do the talk shows from, and Roger's doing games from his house. And for you, I know you're doing games in Ann Arbor in the big house and calling basketball games. And just for you, how tough was last year? And maybe how much did it make you a better broadcaster? Because not being there, not being able to be around the team, but and still also try to pick up on some little things, but calling it off a monitor. It was hard to do, but I feel like we were all able to adjust. How about you?
I think first and foremost, it made me a more appreciative broadcaster for the things that I think we all kind of took for granted when you experience this. To be able to travel with the team and go to these road venues and be a part of what makes college basketball so great, those atmospheres. To have that taken away is tough. Honestly, from a basketball side, I thought of the four major sports, that's the easiest one to call. I couldn't imagine. I did 8 years of minor league baseball. I could not imagine trying to call a major league game with every feet imaginable, because a pop up behind home plate can look the same trajectory wise as a home run to center field. And then you couple that with MILB.TV, where you're lucky to have a shot of home plate in that situation. So, you know, for basketball, basically everything that you need to see is on the screen. We were able to pipe in effects. It was manageable. It was a fun challenge for a little bit. Then you know, when we came back from our pause and rallied to win at Wisconsin, you wish you were there. Maybe the game of the regular season in college basketball was Michigan at Ohio State. And you know, still a great game to call, but you wish you were there, right? So for me, it's one of those years where you realize how special the position is. You want to try to make it so that people who are listening, it sounds normal to them, because we were all just starved for normalcy. And if any of our broadcasts could bring that to somebody, great. Even though we had to do it differently, you know, I'm hopeful we'll never have to do that again. But you know, just really thankful that we had games, because gosh, you know, when I'm sitting there last August in the Big Ten's, you know, at the time canceling football, you're not feeling great about basketball or hockey, which is a big thing up here. Michigan's got a lot of Olympic sports that are very successful. You know, I'm just glad we had anything. You know, we had a Big Ten championship, Elite Eight run. You know, that was a heck of a story. I just wish there would have been more fans around there to be able to see it in person.
No doubt about it. And that was what you had last spring, and now you're gearing up for another basketball season coming up. But for you, I want to go all the way back to the beginning of your journey. What was the initial spark in sportscasting? We always talk about on the show. Nobody's path is similar. I think you may have one of the more unique paths as well.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I never really thought about being a broadcaster for a while. I was very shy as a kid, and I realized pretty quickly that playing sports was not going to be a thing for me. My peak athletic achievement was the 2007 Cleveland Plain Dealer High School Bowler of the Year.
Congrats.
That is the peak. Yes, it's carried me to this moment. But for me, I went to college at Ohio University, and at the outset, I just thought, okay, maybe I could try sports writing, see if that would work. And I had a professor of my Journalism 101 class, Tom Hodson, who is still a mentor and a dear friend of mine, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think that's what makes educators and professors and teachers so special, is that, they see the potential and the opportunity before even the person does. And he was doing Ohio women's basketball at that point, had said, hey, I'd love you to come out and try. So I did a few halftime updates, ended up doing some color analysis for him. And that kind of just snowballed from there. I loved it. I had a blast with it. Snowballed into doing some Ohio baseball, working with an off-campus radio station to do high school football and basketball. And that just kind of, rolled and rolled and rolled from there. My initial love was baseball. I grew up in Cleveland in the 1990s. If I'd have grown up in the 80s, football would have been my first love because the Browns were great. And in the 2000s, with the LeBron era, it probably would have been, basketball with the Cavs. But I was 5 years old at a World Series game. I was at my first World Series game at 5, and my dad was at his first World Series game at almost 40. It was such a special time to be in and around that, that region. So I always kind of figured I'd want to do baseball. Did minor league ball for 8 years, and then kind of pivoted more to the college route for a number of reasons. And from there, got into IMG, which became Learfield IMG College, which is now Learfield, and that kind of ultimately led me to Michigan.
Take a moment to brag on Ohio University and the opportunities they gave you. You mentioned the great professor you had that really opened the door, but you got to be really proud of everything that school continues to do in broadcasting and in journalism. It doesn't get talked as much maybe as, Syracuse or Northwestern or Mizzou, but it's a great school.
Yeah, and I'm actually in particular excited because one of my closest friends, we lived together for 5 years in Winston, Tony Castricone, who I know you guys, I believe you've had him on the show before. He's in town, like he's here. I see him today. I'm stoked about that.
We
lived together for 5 years. Yeah, absolutely. But Tony, Tony was a great student broadcaster there, and what he's been able to do at Washington is amazing. Chuck Swirsky with the Bulls has always been so nice to me and gracious with his time. And it's not, to your point, it's not to the depth of a Syracuse or something along those lines. But for me, honestly, I couldn't have done it at Syracuse. I needed to be bad for a little while. I needed to have 100 games with not a whole lot of people listening to me, with not a whole lot of competition. It's a big reason why I realized I needed to kind of work at an off-campus station and, make $30 a game and just have some games where I wasn't very good. Because I wasn't sitting there at 8 years old calling a game off of TV. That was not, I know a lot of people in this industry have that as their background. That wasn't me. So I needed that, and Ohio provided that for me. So always indebted, their current broadcaster, Russ Eisenstein, has always been very, very supportive. And he gave me a lot of opportunities as a 19, 20-year-old student that, I don't know if it would have been as acclimated. And Ohio's very good at the behind-the-scenes stuff, which has helped me a lot at Learfield, where you learn how to make the entirety of the broadcast sound good. Yes, if your play-by-play sounds good, that's great. But if everything else sucks, no one's going to want to listen. And I learned that at a young age at Ohio, and that has continued to be a focal point, whether I was in minor league baseball with IMG, now Learfield. It is a team effort. The play-by-play person on the radio broadcast, sorry, I've got a motion sensor here in the office, so that might happen a couple times. The play-by-play person on radio is so vital, but everything has to come together. quarterback can't do what he's supposed to do without the help of the offensive line. And we have to wear multiple hats. Sometimes we have to be the quarterback and the offensive line. And it's so valuable. And I learned that at a very young age.
Yeah, I feel like you learn that in minor league baseball because you're the jack of all trades. You're the stat pack guy. You're the game note guy. You're the pull the tarp guy. In minor league baseball, Brian, specifically in terms of how long did it take you to get to your delivery and your style? Are you still looking at that nowadays and still, just kind of parsing through when you listen back to tape? Just how many years? Because I'm still going through it. I'm 10 years into this and still trying to develop my style. But I feel like minor league baseball, 140 games, constant reps. That's the ultimate rep sport where you get the opportunity to get really good at this because you do it so much.
Well, and I think, first off, from my standpoint, because I hadn't done a whole lot, I just kind of gleaned as much as I could from those I listened to. So early on in baseball, I was a Tom Hamilton clone. Mm-hmm. I mean, Tom Hamilton is the guy I still listen to more than anybody else. He's who I grew up listening to. I remember going to Indians games and we would hustle back to our car so we could hear the post-game highlights. That was, and then again, this was before I was ever a broadcaster. It's just what we did. My dad wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear it. Got to hear Hammy's highlights. But you're right. Baseball, I don't care what sport you want to go into, calling minor league baseball helps because you get reps at describing what's happening. You have to talk. You have to deal with great games and terrible games. So I think we're always trying to seek out our voice and our tone and our mentality. I think where minor league baseball really helped me was that if I did feel like I needed to improve something, I had a ton of reps really quickly. For example, this was, I think, my first year in Winston-Salem, 2012. And I realized when listening to some tape that I was putting the verb in front of the subject when a ball was put in play. So instead of saying Jones races back into left center, I would say going back into left center is Jones. And we all understand why that happens, right? We're looking down at our scorecard, in particular when, your team, in my case, the Dash, was at the plate, and, say Potomac's in town, it's the first game of a series, you haven't seen them much. You don't know instinctually who their left and center fielders are. So I spent probably 2 months, and again, those broadcasts weren't my best, but I needed to kind of shake that from my instincts of, hey, if I'm going to broadcast, I want it to be able to be transcribed in a way where it doesn't have to be perfect English, but it should flow to where if you transcribe what I'm saying, it's a pretty typical sentence. And none of us say, having me on this show today is Kyle and Roger. It's no, Kyle and Roger are having me on the show today. So if you can drill that into yourself, it's not easy when that was your instinct for so long. But for me, that was one example of where just having a game every 5 months was invaluable because I needed to get that out, in my opinion. Not everybody does it that way. I hear plenty of people do that, and that doesn't mean they're bad broadcasters. But for me, I felt that was important, and having minor league baseball and the reps that it comes with allows you to accomplish that quicker than a 12-game football season or a 35-game college basketball season.
Do you have any minor league baseball stories? I say that because I did a season with Jacksonville with Roger. I know Roger has plenty of stories. Where one of them where his suitcase fell out of the team bus in Birmingham, Alabama.
Never saw it
I've
again.
slept in the broadcast booth because I didn't want to drive an hour and a half home to St. Augustine from Jacksonville. I mean, you spent a long time in it. Do you have anything that stands out in a wacky, wonky minor league story?
Well, us three can hang out afterward, and I can tell you a few. No, so fortunately, knock on wood, I really didn't have any sort of like terrible travel stories. Like we didn't have a long night where we were, camped out on the side of a highway because the bus broke down. But I won't say the ballpark because they still have a team. But it was a 3-game road series, and I went in the booth the first day, felt totally fine. And again, this is pre-COVID, right? So, if you're feeling a little bit sick, there was more of that instinct to tough through it. So first day felt great. It was a Monday through Wednesday series. And I get back to the hotel that night, and I'm a little sniffly. All right, it was a long day, travel day, whatever. Go back Tuesday. I was all right when I got there, and then by the end of the broadcast, it was a longer game. I'm like, man, boy, I just don't feel great. And I get back for the getaway day, and their broadcaster, who I'm not going to say who it is, but I love the guy, but I think it was his first year. And he's like, oh, yeah, I meant to tell you, they think there might be some asbestos in the booth. We're going to take a look at that. So I called, 3 games solo in this booth, and there's asbestos. And apparently there was. It wasn't a lot, but like it was legit. Like by Wednesday, I was struggling, man. Like it wasn't great. And I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? This is absurd. But that was just one for me, like, but hey, it's the show goes on. It's minor league baseball. You're more worried about getting your mascot set up and ready to go with the group picnic in right center. I enjoyed my time in minor league baseball, but I did it long enough. Whether that resulted in what I'm doing here, or if I were in sales somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I had my fun in minor league baseball, and I'm glad I did it, but I'm glad I'm not in it anymore.
Well, part of the fun, I know, for you started kind of like I did in the Appalachian League. So while you're still in college, I was with the Kingsport Mets, and I only had to go to Burlington, where you are. I only had to go once. So that means I only had to climb up and find a way into that press box atop the roof just, 3 or 4 times. But for you, that must have been a daily grind. That press box has been talked about on the show before by others.
Yeah, it was one, but at that point, man, I was 20 years old. Like I felt like I was a king. I felt like I was a king in that booth. It was my first chance in minor league baseball. It was tough. Don't get me wrong. I was not, I had a built-in excuse if they had to put the tarp on the field. I'm sorry. It's dangerous. I just got to stay here. Right. Man, I loved the Appy League. I'm so glad that they've been able to kind of survive and I think really thrive in this new world order of baseball. I would have loved to have been the voice of the sock puppets. That'd have been sweet. But no, my favorite part of the Appy League is Johnson City. So we went there for a series, and then we played them in the playoffs, and I had a heartbreaking narrow 20-2 loss in the deciding game there. But they had, I think it's gone now, right? But the hill in right field. And I walked that thing. I just wanted to see, okay, and that thing is steep. So the manager that year was Mike Schilt, who's now with the Cardinals. Couldn't have been nicer. Literally, his mom reached out to compliment me, and she did that with other people but Johnson City didn't have a broadcaster, so she would, Mrs. Schilt just kind of reached out to people and said, hey, thank you for doing these broadcasts, et cetera, et cetera. So Schilt and I talked several times, and I was like, what do you tell your outfielders? They're like, just don't look. It's going to come down. Don't run up it. It's going to come down. Don't worry about it. But to me, that's the best. That's the best Appy League quirk, is that hill. It's a bummer it's not there anymore, but it should not be there. It's smart.
No doubt about it. And kind of speaking of your minor league baseball days as well, the time in Burlington, you go to Frisco and then back to Winston-Salem. Were you just kind of focused only on baseball, or how were you kind of looking at building your career in those early stages?
At the early stages, yes. The hope and the goal was to be able to, when I signed off of my last broadcast in September, to not have to wait until April to be on the air again. But I would have done that if that were the right situation, because I wanted to do baseball that significantly. It's why once I got to Winston-Salem, I wasn't, seeking out any AA job or even any AAA job, number 1 or number 2, because I felt like that was a good place for me to be, because it was a really good organization with an amazing ballpark in a city that had at the time IMG for me to get work during the off season and kind of build some different some different skill sets and some different things for my resume. But yes, until probably 2015, which was after my 4th year in minor league baseball, that was when I started to realize, okay, I don't have to continue to pursue baseball. That still was the primary focus for a couple of years after that. But yeah, from the time I started until 2015, it was, I wouldn't have turned down a big time offer from another sport, but outside of like an outlandish, ridiculous opportunity that I wasn't prepared for, I was going after baseball as much as I could.
So what was that mindset shift like when now you transfer from minor league baseball to now IMG and the college world and studio hosting? How do you get to IMG, do that job, cultivate relationships, and eventually move up in a great company?
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, I can't speak higher of that department, of that of the company, of what they do to develop talent. And the results certainly speak for themselves in terms of who has been able to graduate from, that department, that building in Winston-Salem to go on and do amazing things. At the time, it strictly was just, hey, here's a way to balance my resume. Here's a way to get experience doing, because in baseball, I think a pretty common way to kind of get your foot in the door is to go and get a pre-post position. So that for me was the allure. And working the two main schools that I worked on from a hosting standpoint were Kentucky and then Michigan. I basically felt like, okay, if I could show them, hey, I've been in minor league baseball and I, hosted a national championship game for, Kentucky, and I hosted, X number of Michigan football and basketball games, at least that would be a potential to stand out. It didn't result in anything, but that was kind of my mindset on it. From there, then you kind of realize as, Tony Castricone goes to Washington, David Shoemake gets the Duke job, Matt Chazanow goes to Washington State. Before that, Andy Demetra, Carter Blackburn, Jason Benetti. These are high level broadcasters going to do big things. It's one of those things. If you put the time and effort into that company, and in particular that department, and you do things the right way, you're giving yourself a chance to succeed. We all know that there's no direct path to a certain position. We could talk about how I got to Michigan, but basically it started with two guys getting into a fight. That's what started me becoming the voice of Michigan basketball. But you have to put yourself in that spot to be ready if and when that happens. And to me, now Learfield puts people in that position better than anywhere that I've been associated with or that I know about. It's not for everybody. I totally get the allure of wanting to call games no matter what. This takes a backseat, but I can tell you that in hosting for Tom Leach and Mike Pratt at Kentucky and Matt Shepard and Terry Mills at Michigan, I became a better play-by-play broadcaster by listening to them, by understanding the totality of the broadcast, by doing my hosting responsibilities. I became a better play-by-play broadcaster so that when I did have the fill-in opportunities, I was ready for them. You can't substitute experience, but that's the next best thing, and it allows you to be put in that position to where a Learfield and a school entrusts you in that moment to be able to, because you've been a part of the broadcast in a different way of, well, if they host, why can't they call the game? And it goes from there.
And you mentioned being ready when your number is called, and I know you did some fill-in for Duke originally. And so what was that like? And that's one of those things, you're not just stepping into any other broadcast, right? That's like Alabama football or the New York Yankees on radio. Duke basketball, that's a big brand. So what were the nerves like? What was it like to talk to Coach K? I assume you interviewed him. What was that whole experience?
So I did not talk to Coach K. Just logistically, they had the analyst John Roth do that, but I was terrified. I'll be honest. So that I found out about that assignment a week after I started full time with the department, and not only were they 2 Duke basketball games, but it was the 999th and 1,000th wins for Coach K at Duke, and I'm like, How? Me? Why? What? Um, and it's again, I think it's very similar. The leadership team at Learfield, at the time IMG, they saw something in me before I saw it myself. Like my professor, on a fall day in Athens, Ohio in 2007. I think in some cases, we think we're ready before we are, and in some cases, we don't know we're ready until someone else has to kind of push us into that. And that was it for me for Duke. Now, I was terrified partly because I also, because it's crossover season, I'm engineering the broadcast as well, and there's a lot of moving parts to make it sound good. And that was a year where they were renovating the Crow's Nest, so we were kind of the side, and it was literally like the second and third times that they were doing a broadcast there for the network. So there were a few moving parts, but yeah, I mean, I was nervous. But that was kind of the goal. When I left minor league baseball to go to IMG, I knew I was giving up 95+% of my play-by-play assignments for that next calendar year. My goal was and my decision was rooted in the fact that I wanted to transition from a bunch of meaningless games to a few meaningful games. Now, I mean, minor league baseball, again, I loved it. But you could even ask the players. They're worried. They want their team to do well, but man, they're trying to move up to the next level. If you're an A-ball, you're trying to get better. You could have somebody take a no-hitter into the 8th or 9th inning, or it could be a playoff game, and yeah, you get those juices flowing, but the vast majority of minor league baseball games don't carry the type of meaning that a Duke home game would carry in basketball, or a Michigan home game carries in basketball or football. That's the transition I wanted to make. I wanted to make my games stand out a little bit more. And because of that, I had to sacrifice a ton of play-by-play. And it was not an easy decision. And I totally understand people who don't want to do that. But I think eventually you get to a point where, okay, I think your tape's good enough. Now it needs to pop more. Now it's not so much about your skills. It's about, do they want to listen to Dash versus Hillcats? Or do they want to listen to Duke basketball, to Michigan basketball? Because ultimately, that's advice that Corey Provis gave me when I sent him my demo. This is a long time ago. I haven't talked to Corey in several years, but he said, try to get a major league game, because people listen to your demo want to hear Twins Tigers. They don't want to hear Dash Hillcats.
Kind of along those lines as well, when you talk about all the great guys you had at IMG that gone on to get some great jobs, and it kind of reminds me of that Syracuse Newhouse Mafia. There's a certain style in the way they do things. There's some inner knowledge you guys share with each other. Is there kind of a secret to success for all of you guys, or some certain characteristics you picked up along that helped you the most in all the work you've done since?
Yeah, I don't know if it's quite a mafia or anything like that, but I do think what Learfield helps to teach you is that you understand the big picture. You understand the totality of the assignment, of the responsibility of the moment. It goes so far beyond, the company goes so far beyond your radio broadcast that it's difficult sometimes even to comprehend it. You work out of that building, you see, at least from the radio side, all that matters. And ultimately, listen, if you have the best play-by-play guy in the world, but you don't play 3 paid spots and don't do 2 live reads, or you have a middle-of-the-road broadcaster, but everything gets played, we all know what Learfield would rather have, right? You need to take care of that aspect. And I think that's where, in those interviews and those conversations with schools, schools don't have that frequently. I mean, think about, Aaron Goldsmith told me the story when he was going through the Mariners process, that because the Mariners had not hired a full-time broadcaster for decades, because it was, Dave Niehaus was there forever, since Rick Riz, and Riz had been there for a while, and they alphabetized all the applications by first name, Aaron. So he was the first person they heard. If his name is Sean Goldsmith, he might still get that job, but he might not, right? There's no rhyme or reason, A, to how opportunities come open, and B, it's a lot different than applying for a sales position. those are much more cyclical. A lot of people come and go with that. Whereas for a play-by-play position, whenever Don Fisher at Indiana retires, there won't be a soul at that school that's ever gone through a hiring process for their broadcaster. So how do they do it? That's where you kind of mesh ideas, and that's where having the understanding of, maybe solicit applications in a similar way, but what a school wants, what they care about, how they want to organize applicants, how many people they want to talk to is just so different. I think that's where it kind of helps, in that, people go through that process. Doesn't always work by any stretch, but having that opportunity to bounce ideas off people and know what other processes look like, that I think really helps. But yeah, I mean, it's not like everybody, not everyone from Syracuse gets every job. Not everyone from Learfield gets every Power 5 position. But again, you're trying to enhance your chances. You're trying to help things out. It's not easy, but if you can bump your chance up 2%, is that worth it? I think in a lot of cases it is.
And for you in Michigan, it went from filling in for Matt Shepard to a full-time opportunity. Just what can you tell us about everything that kind of went into that, first of all, opportunity for you to make the move from Winston-Salem to Ann Arbor, and then how, once you got to Ann Arbor, you started ingratiating yourself and becoming part of that Michigan Wolverine community?
Yeah, so I had been hosting for Michigan down in Winston-Salem for a few years, and before any of the process started, there was a game that Matt had to miss during the 2018 season. They were playing Chattanooga. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and I had just basically said to my boss, "Hey, I've been hosting for them for a few years. Matt has to miss the game. I'd love to call it. I could. It was the day after Thanksgiving. I could drive, see family on Thanksgiving, which is very rare in our business. As we do Thanksgiving, head up to Ann Arbor, through Columbus to drive back to North Carolina to host Michigan, Ohio State the next day in North Carolina. And they said, okay, yeah, let's do it. So I went up there, called the game, and then I think everything went smoothly. I filled in for another game in December that Matt had to miss, and then a few weeks after that, it was announced that he was taking over as the Tigers play-by-play voice. At that point, I didn't know what that meant for the rest of that season or moving forward. But after a couple of weeks of conversations that I was not involved with, but was being discussed about this, they basically said, hey, here are a couple of games in the regular season that Matt has to miss because of Tigers' responsibilities. And then, spring training telecasts start the week of the Big Ten tournament. It's just not going to be feasible for Matt to do those games. So we're going to have you travel and do them. Which was, that was a thrill of a lifetime. Because at that point, you don't know. You never know. You can never assume that your team is going to make a run in the postseason. And they got to the Sweet 16 after getting to the Big Ten tournament championship game the week prior. But you never know that. And for me, there was no guarantee I was going to get that job. There was no guarantee that Matt was not going to do it. It ultimately was determined that he couldn't make it work. And then it was ultimately determined that, they wanted to bring me aboard and have me be the main guy. But, for that whole run, I was trying to soak it up as much as I could, because you never know. You never know. You're going to get a Sweet 16 opportunity again for a program. Now, Michigan's been there a lot. That's the expectation here. But from my standpoint, I treated it as a 3-week job interview. And it's definitely different when you're showing up occasionally and then being there all the time for the biggest 3 weeks of the season. The thrill. And then after that, honestly, it was kind of a waiting game. It was, basically it was trying to figure out, hey, can Matt do it? Matt had been doing it for a while. I wasn't going to sit here and, try to take away any opportunities from anybody. I was ready and willing to do the job if they deemed that it was open. But it was just kind of a waiting out process. In fact, so that June, Michigan baseball went to the College World Series. And they didn't have, they had a local station carry some home games during the regular season, but they didn't have any sort of network for baseball. So while I was waiting for more information on the basketball job, I got a call on a Monday saying, "Hey, are you able to call the College World Series this weekend?" And I'm like, "What?" And that to me, honestly, I'm beyond blessed that I get to call Michigan basketball. But as somebody who called 1,000-ish baseball games in the minor leagues, but I never really called games that truly mattered, right? I never got it. I didn't fill in the big leagues at any point. I transitioned out of baseball. To call those 6 games felt like a closure in baseball that I will never ever forget, because I didn't expect it. I had to treat it like minor league baseball because it's Omaha. But from the basketball process, I asked a couple people who I knew, but they're like, "We don't know. We haven't heard anything. Good luck." And then, I found out in like late August, early September, like right around kickoff of football, that they did want to bring me up here, and move shortly thereafter and continued to work with the company. It was a unique process, but it basically, to me, the lesson is you kind of have to do the best you can, and then realize you're not guaranteed anything. There's a lot of really qualified people that can do this job. I was just really thankful and blessed that they picked me.
Before we get to the technical side of play-by-play and what you like to hear, I'm interested because that trial run, right? So you do the couple weeks of basketball in the NCAA tournament. You're doing the College World Series. Possibility that you're in the running for the men's basketball job. Not think too much about that and put too much pressure on yourself as you're calling the game. Like, man, I better nail this call. I better nail them going to the championship series. How do you? I don't know if it's possible to flush those memories out, but did you feel that pressure calling those games during what you kind of coined?
Into prep, like I prep my tail off for that. The broadcasts themselves, I didn't really feel it. For me, it was the interactions with the team, with the time Coach Beeline or Coach Bakich, because I didn't have much of a relationship with them. I was just, I was showing up to get them through the end of the season. So for me, that's where I really felt the pressure. I remember the third time I ever called Michigan basketball was at Indiana. And I mean, that was, you want to talk about, a cathedral of college basketball. And I'm looking around, and about a half an hour before the game, one of the Michigan TV crew members comes up to me and says, "Hey, normally Shep would grab like 3 or 4 interviews with players after the game. Are you good doing that?" And like, at the time, I'm like, I'm going to say yes to anything. You could ask me to run up to the very top of Assembly Hall and do it. Like, I'm in. I'm going to do it. But then you're sitting there going, "Well, crap, what if they lose? They don't know